So I want to start with a story that I kind of hinted at earlier, and I not to embarrass one person or draw them out, but sometimes it's just good to know the reality of what happens when Jesus shows up in life. So over the summer we did a series called Goliath Must Fall, and this guy Brian that you saw up here, he began attending during that time, and through the course of a number of weeks, God really kind of drew his heart and his mind and brought some clarity that a 30-year history of drug use and addiction that he kind of thought wasn't a problem became evident that it was killing him. It was hurting his family, hurting his kids. And so, man, as you tend to do when you realize that, he began to try to make some changes on his own. And how many of you guys know that sometimes you just trade one addiction for another? And so he's like, I'm never doing that anymore. Instead, I'm going to do this. And so that kind of happened for a number of weeks as he tried on his own and eventually realized that he couldn't do it. And so he entered a residential treatment facility for 30 days. And God used that program to just turn his life around. And so as we mentioned earlier, he's celebrating 97 days clean and sober, which is incredible. And he's, in the course of all of this, just kind of a renewed focus on the place of Jesus in his life and leading his family and kind of getting his life straightened back out. But through the course of that, while he was in this treatment facility, he called some members of the team here at Grace Union and invited them out because he had an idea. And he said, what if you guys could come out and bring church to the facility? And so we said, hey, absolutely. We have no idea what that's going to look like, but let's try it. And so we went out and we did it. And the first night, there was people who made decisions to follow Jesus there in the treatment facility and asking for Bibles and counseling and talking forever afterwards. And so that's been going on now every other week since he left there. And so he is the key to all of that. And so Jesus has used his life to now open the door for countless others to not only hear the gospel, but for many to have made the decision already to follow, giving out Bibles, doing all this kind of stuff. And so it's just amazing to watch as God shows up on the scene and does something in one person's life, and before they even have all their stuff figured out, he's already working through their life. And another one of those stories that you saw was simple, and it's Melina. And so Melina is the friend of a girl who's grown up in our church, right? She didn't come from a life of brokenness and all that kind of stuff. She grew up here, and tons of you guys have invested in this girl's life and the girl that brought her. And so you've been working in our kids' ministries and loving kids and helping them grow up in the knowledge of Jesus and in his love and care. And so there's this girl who's done just that. We're going to call her Frankette because I don't want to embarrass her. And so Frank is our name for people who are fictional. And so Frankette is a girl. And so this girl, Frankette, has grown up in our church and about 2 years ago followed Jesus in baptism in a similar way to those folks that you saw today. And since those 2 years ago, now 2 of her friends have followed Jesus in baptism as well. Friends who didn't grow up in the church, friends who weren't part of it. And because of the work of God through this girl, in her friends' lives, now it's happened kind of out and out. And so I say that to say this: at Grace Union Church, we encounter grace through Jesus right where we are, and then we're moved by his grace toward all that God has for us. And so because of Jesus, we can come to God as a hot mess, a cute kid, and anything in between those two, right? And so that's how it really works. And through Jesus, God embraces us and then actually involves us in bringing hope to the world. And so I want to share 2 scriptures that really kind of make the theological case for this, and then we're going to tell a story for the rest of our time together. So 2 Corinthians 5:12 says this: God made him, who is Jesus, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us. So he took all of our sin and put it on the one who had no sin. God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So God took Jesus and took his righteousness and applied it to all of our lives and applied our sin to his life and then punished it in him. All right? And so Jesus came as a man to take our sin on himself and then accept the judgment that sin deserved. And now, because of that, the door is open for a life of favor and blessing between us and God. So it's not just that your debt is canceled because of Jesus. Now, because of Jesus' righteousness applied to your life, when God looks at you, he goes, oh, dang, man, man, they got it going on. Look at what they're, wow. And when you pray, he goes, oh, you want something? Absolutely. You know? Oh, you need help? Absolutely, man. Look at all that you are and me. And so because of the righteousness of Jesus, God is now favorably disposed towards us, and that results in a life of blessing. And all of that happens the moment you put your confidence and your faith in Jesus and his death and his resurrection on your behalf. So that's what that verse is saying in 2 Corinthians 5:21. And I want to back up a couple verses because it talks about this next step too in 2 Corinthians 5:18. It says, all of this that we just talked about is from God, who reconciled, which just means reconnected, who reconciled us to himself through Christ, and listen to this, and then gave us the ministry of reconciliation. And so that's what we were talking about with those two stories. Immediately, God has already reconciled those people to God, and now through their life, he's reconciling them to all these other people who are then reconciling those people to God. Isn't it amazing the immediate web that takes place because of what Jesus does? And so the point we're going to make, and then the story that's going to kind of explain that is this. Sin and evil separate people from God and people from people, right? People from each other. But Jesus has come to reconnect both. So sin, your sin and my sin, pits us against God and God against us. This is a two-sided separation, right? So when we're sinful, we're actually hostile towards God, right? There's mistrust, there's fear, there's apprehension, there's all these things. So it's a two-sided separation. And then our sin causes God to look at us with wrath and judgment. So the sin causes a two-sided separation. Right? And on top of that, sin pits you against your fellow man and your fellow woman, doesn't it? Right? It's always in the way. And so people wrong you. You wrong others. And it creates separation. And even more than just physical action, the idea, right? There's all these separations that are up here. There's suspicion. How many of you guys are divided from certain people just because of suspicion, right? You look at them and you mistrust maybe entire people groups, maybe religions, maybe whatever it is, but we look at things, there's just this suspicion. I don't know what to think of them, so I'm just going to think bad stuff. When in doubt, think bad. And so there's suspicion, there's misunderstanding, there's assumptions, and so there's real physical wrong that separates, and there's imagined wrong that separates. And so here's the thing, is Jesus wants to resolve all of those issues. He wants to reconnect you to God, but he also wants to reconnect you to people, because through those connections, he's going to touch all the people around your life. And so that's what he does. And so Jesus wants to be the resolution for all that. So we're going to kind of just wade through a classic New Testament story. Many of you have heard this, but maybe you haven't slowed down enough to really see all the cool stuff in it. So we're going to walk slowly through this story. I'll read a few verses, we'll elaborate, we'll keep moving, and this will be the balance of our time this morning. So this is in John chapter 4. It's known as the story of the Samaritan woman, or the woman at the well. How many of you guys have heard that story before? Okay, so we're going to dive into that. Now Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that he was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although in fact Jesus was not the one that baptized, but his disciples. So he left Judea and he went back once more to Galilee. And verse 4 says, now he had to go through Samaria. So we got a map I want to show you guys here. This is the area and the time of Jesus and how it looked. So I want to show you, this is actually a cat toy, but it's a laser pointer. I bought it this morning at Target for $4.99. So this is Judea. Right down here is where Jesus was as this story started. And it says he had to go home, which was up here in Galilee. So this is where Jesus grew up at. So Jesus was down here. He was going up here. For those of you guys who are over here, we're going to do this over here. This is a cat toy. I got it from Target for $4.99. Jesus was down here. He's trying to go up here. Here's Samaria in the middle. It says he had to go through Samaria. We got it? We're all on the same page. I know that geography is tough, but sometimes it matters. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bought the cat toy. So John tells us that Jesus had to go through Samaria. So his path led through Samaria. But I want to tell you something. Jesus didn't have to go through Samaria. In fact, most Jews avoided Samaria entirely. Right? So let's show the map again because we need it. Right? And so most Jews because they hated Samaritans, would start off down here. They would cross right here running up and down. There's a big river called the Jordan River, right? And so they would start off here. They would go all the way over here. They'd cross this river. They'd walk all the way through this other region of Perea, all the way past Samaria. Then they'd cross the river again and then go where they were going. Make sense? Did you guys see, or do I need to come back over here? Here we go. All right. So here's what most Jews would do. They would start off down here. Rather than going straight through here to here, they would cross the river here. They would walk in this other region all the way through here, through Decapolis, all these foreign areas. Then they would cross here and go to Galilee. All right, so they would avoid this whole green area entirely because they were color racists, right? They didn't like green. And so anyway... And so that's what they would do. They would add multiple days. If you walked straight up through, it was about a 7-day walk. If you went around, it probably took you about 10 days. They added extra days. They crossed a river twice unnecessarily, all to avoid the green region of the world. I wouldn't want to walk on green ground either. I've never seen any in real life. So anyway, so they wanted, that was a joke, by the way, and I thought it was way funnier than you're acting like. And so anyway, they would avoid it entirely. And I want to just point out that Jesus didn't do what everyone else did. Jesus refused to avoid the people that others avoided. Everyone else was like, you just automatically go around those people. You don't go to those places. You don't talk to those folks, right? Jesus said, that's nonsense. We're going right through the center of it, and we're going to stop at every town along the way. We're going to do all the things that normal people would do if they weren't terribly racist or hateful. And so anyway, and so the question I want to tackle really quickly, because not all of us understand the ancient complexities of this, but why did Jews and Samaritans dislike each other so much? Why was everybody willing to walk days out of their way to avoid the other people? And so Jews were very big on racial and ethnic and religious purity, okay? So they were trying to pass down their way of life through the generations and keep it pure and preserved, okay? And so the Samaritans were actually descendants of ethnic Jews, right, from generations and generations earlier. But in a period of time when the rest of the Jews were all carried off into bondage and slavery, the Samaritans were left in the land. And rather than remaining pure, they said, well, there's no people around. There's no good-looking chicks anymore, so we're going to go to the neighboring places and find some ladies. So they began to intermarry, okay? And so the Samaritans were this offspring of a people that intermarried. They mixed the races, but with the mixing of the races came a mixing of religions. And so what happens is they bring their foreign wives and husbands and all this kind of stuff, and it begins to cloud what's really taught in Scripture. And so they had kind of a form of Judaism, but it was really kind of wonky, okay? And so that's what the end result was. So the Jews hated the Samaritans because they saw them as racial half-breeds and as being religiously broken, kind of off-key. They were kind of like, they saw them almost as like a cult in a sense, right? So they're off-center. And then the Samaritans hated the Jews because everyone hates people that hates them. Right? And so it turned into two-sided really fast. So everyone hated everyone, okay? And that's kind of just how it went through the generations. And there was a time when this turned into like violence, right? There was constant acts of vandalism. Samaritans would go to the Jewish temple with bones of animals and things that would defile the temple. And rather than bring in an offering, they'd throw all that in the temple. And people would lose their minds, right? It'd be like, what have you done, right? So, I mean, so there was these constant little acts that went on. It wasn't, at this point in the story, there wasn't like open violence anymore, but it was kind of like a cultural, tribal Cold War, okay? So it was kind of like family that you super hate, that you might punch sometimes, okay? And so some of you guys are already thinking about Thanksgiving this week. I can't wait, right? And so anyway, it's like that uncle that you have. And so that's what's going on here, okay? Now here's, again, the thing is that most in that day on both sides of the issue just avoided the other folks. But unlike most people in his day, Jesus refused to perpetuate this form of division and hatred and mistrust. And so going on to verse 5, it says this: he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, tired as he was from his journey, sat down by the well, and it was about noon. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, he said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" And then in parentheses it says his disciples had gone into town to buy food. So the well was outside of town, right? And Jesus is there by the well just kind of hanging out. And there's this woman who comes. And it's really unusual that she's there at all at that time of day. So the jars of water would have been like probably 5 to 10 gallon jars, right? And a gallon of water weighs about 10 pounds. So you imagine they're carrying anywhere from 50 to 100 pounds of water. Women did not go in the hottest part of the day to carry water, right? So they went in the morning or in the evening, because if you're familiar with the desert, it's really cold at night, it's really hot during the day. So they would go while it was still cool and nice, not at noon when it was 115 degrees. So nobody went at this time. So here's this woman who comes at a time of day when nobody else comes. And their jars are big, so she didn't just run out of water. It's not like going to the drinking fountain. So she's here on purpose at a time when nobody else is here. She purposely avoids the people in her town. And so as we read further, we'll find out that she is a serious social outcast. And so this woman is avoiding the judgmental glances and comments of all of the people in her village. And so Jesus sees this, maybe he knows why she's here at this time, maybe we don't know, but he sees this woman, and you have to understand from a Jewish perspective, this woman is an outcast even among outcasts, all right? So it's bad enough just to be a Samaritan. This woman wasn't even good enough to be accepted by Samaritans, right? So she is a loser among losers from a Jewish perspective. And so Jesus sees this woman, and he asks her for a drink in order to start a conversation. And so verse 9 says, the Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew." And she probably said it like this, "Jew," right? Whatever it is, right? She didn't say it in a nice way. "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How could you ask me for a drink?" So Jesus is trying to open a conversation with her, and she immediately is trying to shut it down, right? Because not only is there the Jewish Samaritan thing that's separating them, but you are a man and I am a woman. There's two reasons here that you think you're better than me. What nerve do you have? What gall do you have trying to ask me for a favor, right? We're not friends twice removed, okay? So what on earth are you thinking that I'm going to help you? So then Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." Right? And so Jesus, here he's trying to pivot this conversation. Right? He purposely is trying to turn it to something internal now, something spiritual. And so he says, listen, you don't know who I am. And if you did, you'd be asking me for a drink, and I'd give you a kind of water that was alive, and it would do something inside of you. Right? And so it's kind of a weird thing when a stranger says that to you in public, right? But that's what Jesus says as he's trying to turn the conversation. So instead of being intrigued, right, she totally ignores him, right? And she kind of changes the subject. But Jesus, instead of being insulted by her attempt to start a fight on the Jewish, Gentile, or Samaritan thing, he kind of avoids this landmine and just turns it back to something internal. Verse 11 says this, "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep," right? She's calling him a dummy. "Where can you get this living water from? Are you greater than our father Jacob," who was one of the Jewish forefathers, right? And so are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us this well to drink from himself, as well as his son and his livestock? So she's ignoring Jesus' attempt to go deeper and get spiritual. And on top of it, she's trying to throw out another thing to fight over. So when she says, our father Jacob, that was like a dagger in the heart of a Jewish person. Like, listen, Jacob is not your father, right? You guys are half-breeds. You guys are this. You guys are that. And so that would have been the normal Jewish response. Those would have been fighting words. So she's trying again to short-circuit this conversation, right? But again, Jesus refuses to take the bait, right? And so he hears the little dig and he's like, yeah, I don't think so. And he just kind of walks around it. Verse 13, Jesus answered, everyone who drinks this water again will be thirsty, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So Jesus is offering her something here that will address the core issue in her life. He's saying, listen, I have something for you that when you take it into yourself, it's going to bring something new in your life that's not only going to transform life now, but it's going to spill over and it's going to have eternal consequences. It's going to change your life starting now, going all the way into eternity. And so the woman said to him, verse 15, Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty. I won't have to keep coming here to draw water. So there's two possibilities here. One, either she's super dumb, right? Which is possible, right? She's not a man, but it's possible. But anyway, no, I'm just kidding. I was going to make a woman joke there, but I figured it wasn't safe. So anyway, either she's super dumb, right? Or she is not interested in talking about what he wants to talk about, right? And that's probably what's going on here. He's made it really clear he's not talking about this water, right? But she's like, well, I wish you'd give me something because I'm tired of carrying these jars back and forth. They're heavy, right? And so she's trying to, again, dodge the issue that Jesus is bringing up because Jesus knows there's something broken inside of her. Verse 16, he told her, go get your husband and come back. I have no husband, she replied. And Jesus said to her, you're right when you say you have no husband. The fact is you've had 5 husbands, and the man you have now is not your husband. So what you've said is quite true. And this is like that moment where everything in the conversation kind of just stops. The record player goes, right? It just, And so the Holy Spirit gives Jesus this insight into the most core, painful reality of this woman's life. And this moment when Jesus shares this insight, it broke the whole conversation open. And now she can no longer avoid the deeper issue stuff that Jesus is wanting to talk about because she's thinking, how on earth do you know that? What do you see in me? You've been talking about this thirst. What is it that you know? What is it that you see? How do you know this? And here's just the reality. We don't know why this woman was married so many times. But I want to share this. First of all, it probably was not by her choice. In that age, women did not have power or independence. They were just a little bit above livestock is how they were treated. So women did not divorce their husbands. They couldn't work. They couldn't support themselves. So you didn't leave your husband. Your husband would leave you. So this woman has been divorced, has been abandoned, has been rejected, whatever you want to call it, 5 different times. And now the man that she's with won't even do her the courtesy of marrying her. She, by her cultural standards, is all but worthless in her village. Nobody sees her as a valuable human being. She's something to be used by people and then thrown out. Now here's the thing. We don't know the whole story. There's probably some character flaw in her. We don't know. Why did 5 different men just quit on her? We don't know. Maybe she has a terrible character flaw. Maybe there's some personality defect, right? Maybe she's like, she just has chronic bad breath, right? We don't know what it is. Maybe she had 3 ears. We don't know. Maybe there's some physical flaw, right? Right? There's something that's causing all of these men to want to get in, and then as soon as they're in, they're back out. Right? So we don't know what it is. Maybe she's a serial adulteress. Like maybe she can't stay still. So maybe it's their fault. Maybe it's something broken in her. Maybe she's morally broken. We don't know, right? Maybe that's the thirst that Jesus was referring to. Maybe Jesus had been cryptically speaking about the fact that she's hoping that sex or love or the right man would fill what's missing in her heart. And maybe that's led her on this trail of wreckage through her life. We don't know, right? But either way, it's a trail of brokenness and wreckage. And Jesus points it out and just lets her know that he sees that and he knows. And he kind of knows that it's linked to this thirst in her life. There's something that's always been missing. And he says, listen, I've got the answer for that. Verse 19, "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you're a prophet. Our ancestors," so she's kind of recognizing, you got me on that one. I don't know how you know that, but I'm still not ready to talk. Okay? So, "Sir, I can see that you're a prophet. Now, our ancestors worshipped on this mountain here, but you Jews claim that the right place to worship is Jerusalem." What's she trying to do? She's trying to argue again. She's like, let's get back to the part where we argue about religion, all right, because this is getting a little too personal. "Woman," Jesus replied, "believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." It's like what you want to argue about doesn't matter at all, right? So that's what he's telling her. Neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. None of that stuff is going to matter in a minute. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For those are the kind of worshipers that he seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship him in spirit and in truth. So here's Jesus with yet another clear attempt by this woman to derail the conversation into argument. But what does he do? He refuses to get tricked and sucked into an argument in this moment because he knows that she's hurting. He knows that she's broken, and she's just throwing up any defense she can. Right? So verse 25, Jesus finally has endured long enough. "The woman said, I know that Messiah, called the Christ, is coming. And when he comes, he'll explain everything to us." Right? So at this point, she can't argue anymore, but she does one of these things. Well, we'll know. Someday we'll know. She's kind of pushing it out to the future. Someday the Messiah is going to come. He'll make all of this clear. So we don't need, you're right, we don't need to argue about this. It's been nice talking. I'll see you later, right? That's what she's trying to do, right? So we know the Messiah will come and he'll explain everything. In verse 26, Jesus declared, "I, the one speaking to you, I am he." That's an I am statement. And so there's other places in the gospel where Jesus said, "I am." And we don't know, it doesn't spell it out here, but there's another place in the garden where they're looking for Jesus. They're going to arrest him. And they say, "We're looking for Jesus of Nazareth." And he says, "I am he." And it says that when he said that, the soldiers fell down on the ground because a little bit of the glory of God was revealed, and it was too much for them to handle. And they stood back up and they said, "Oh, we're looking for Jesus." And he's like, "You don't want me to say it again? You're going to fall down," right? And so I think that that's what's happening here in this moment. Jesus says, "I, the one who's talking to you, I'm him. I'm the one." And she gets this glimpse into the glory of the Son of God in flesh. Because look what happens next. "Then, leaving her water jar, the woman went back to town." What did she come here for? Water. What did she leave without? Water. She's a little discombobulated here. She's like, I don't know what's going on. And so she runs back to town and finds all the people that she hates who have hated her, but none of that matters anymore. And she says, "Listen, you guys got to come with me. There's this guy out there, and he's told me everything I've ever done. He knows the inner realities of my life and my heart. He could be the one. He could be God in human flesh. You guys got to come and see. And they're sitting there going, I can't believe she's talking to us. She wouldn't even walk to get water with us, and here she is doing this. So that's what she does. So leaving her water jar, the woman went back to town and said to the people, come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah? You see, it finally all came together in her mind. This must be God's appointed one. And her mind's spinning. She's thinking, I got this feeling from the first moment he began talking. There was just something different. There was a remarkable kindness in his face, that I'd never seen in anyone else, even against all of my arguments. I've never met anyone like him before. He even knows about that deficit that I've been feeling in my life. I mean, even when I tried to change the subject, even when I played dumb, he was undeterred. It's like he knew for a fact something inside of me. I mean, he knew specific information about my life. How could he know that stuff? And then he said that he is what has been missing in me all along. I mean, she was so shaken by the encounter that she left the water jar behind and scurried after people that she didn't even like, because she had to tell somebody about what had happened inside of her. And so she finds these people that she's been purposely avoiding most of her life now, because this news, this development is so significant that she can't keep it to herself. Come see this guy. He might be God's man in the world. My heart, my past were like an open book before him. And here's the crazy part, is that even knowing my past, he wasn't condemning me. It's like he was offering real life in exchange for the life that I had had. Maybe he's the future. So verse 30 gets back to the town. So they came out of the town, and they made their way toward Jesus. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. Don't let that pass you by too quick. Many of the people in town believed in Jesus. They encountered the Son of God because of the testimony of this woman, this outcast, this nobody, right? But they put their faith in Jesus because of her. Verse 40 says, so the Samaritans came to him, and they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed 2 days. And because of his words, many more of them became believers. They said to the woman, we no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we have heard for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Savior of the world. So I want you to see this. We're about 3 minutes from being done here, but I want you to see this. In the middle of all of her issues, Jesus invites her into life in him. And what Jesus was doing in her begins impacting everyone around her. It starts with her, and then it just jumps, and it jumps, and it jumps. And so I want to make 2 quick points just out of this story, is that Jesus erases dividing lines. Jesus pushes past the barriers that divide. Like the social barriers, the racial barriers, the political stuff, all that other stuff, Jesus pushes past that stuff to embrace. The brokenness in that woman that caused her to push him away, in loving mercy, Jesus pushes right past that. I mean, if you can imagine it as violence, as she's swinging and hitting, and it's like he's absorbing the blows to get close enough for a hug. That's what Jesus was doing. And even her sin and her disinterest in him, Jesus pushed past those to embrace her. And so here's what I'm saying. There is nothing in your life that Jesus will not push past to embrace you. There is nothing. I don't care what the form of brokenness is. I don't care what the offensive thing is. Jesus will push past that to embrace you. That's why he died, to pay the judgment for that. right? There is nothing you can do that hasn't already been judged in Jesus. And so that becomes irrelevant the moment you put your trust in him. So he pushes past everything to embrace us. Guys, Jesus reconnects people to God and then people to each other. So Jesus was not there to tell her how wrong she was, because Jesus knew that he would make her right. He was going to pay the price for all of her brokenness, all of her sin. He would resolve that issue on the cross, so it wasn't going to be an issue. That would open the door then for her to reconnect to God. That's why he's saying, listen, there's this thing you've been thirsty for, and it's ready and waiting for you, because what's been missing in your life is your connection to the God of the universe, and because of what I'm going to do, it's going to be available to you. And so Jesus ignored all of her dismissive attempts, because here's the thing, she'd been hurt so many times. And so here's what happens. When you get hurt a bunch, you just start rejecting other people before they can reject you, right? Isn't that, how many of you guys have done that before? And you don't do it consciously, but you come into a place and you're like, I don't care what people think of me. No, you do. You're just very hurt. And so if you act like you don't care, then it makes you feel better, because at least you dislike them before they could dislike you. And so at least it's on your terms. And that's what she's doing, right? And here's the reality. Here's why I point this out, is that we do this with God. We're so sure that we're suspicious that our sin makes us, just a reject in his sight. So we as people push him away before he pushes us away, because we suspect that he has no interest in us. And so we just go, well, I'm not interested in God anyway. I'm not a God kind of person. I'm not into that kind of stuff. Oh, you're not into someone that would willingly give their life for you? Right? That's not what you're into? You're not into someone that takes all the responsibility, all the ownership to make your life a life of blessing and purpose? That wants to make you good at things in the world, to make the world a better place? That's what you're not into? Okay, I understand totally. No, the issue is that there's this deep-seated fear that I'm not good enough. I'm not enough for him, and so I'm going to reject him out of hand, because at least that's easier to bear. But Jesus pushes past all of that. He takes our dismissiveness. He takes the blows. He takes it all, because he wants to reach in and embrace you. Guys, how many people who aren't here right now, but even how many people who may be here right now, have adopted that same response, where we want to reject God or the idea of him before he can reject us? And so maybe today you can identify with that woman, but I want to assure you that Jesus still wants to erase all the lines that divide you from God and you from others. And then the last thought that we're making out of this is that Jesus wants to work through you to bring reconciliation or reconnection to others. You see, Jesus had been invited into this woman's life, and then he immediately began working through her to touch so many other people as well. Even though she was she was like minutes old as a Christian, and she already had like countless conversions scored to her chart, because Jesus is already working through her life to impact her entire village, right? And here's the thing, now that Jesus has set up residence in your life, his plan is to extend his love and mercy outward from your life to those around you. That's his plan. And I'm glad that he's loved you enough to sacrifice for you and embrace you against all the opposition. But now he wants it to continue. He wants it to go out from you. And he wants to reach and embrace others through you the same way that he's embraced you. You see, all that she did was to tell the story of what Jesus had done for her, right? And so for you, has he pushed past your sin and your guilt to reconnect you to God? Has he pushed past your brokenness and brought some level of healing to things inside of you? Has he pushed past the sense of pointlessness in your life and brought a sense of purpose and direction? Has he brought some level of healing to relationships in your life? Has Jesus grown you as a person and it's saved your marriage, or it's saved your influence over your kids, or any of that? Has he pushed past loneliness and put you in friendships and relationships within the church that have now impacted your life and have carried you through difficult seasons? So what should we do with that? Well, the question is, what would it look like for you and I to do what that woman did? To say to the world around us, come meet the God who did for me what I could not do for myself. Could he be the one? Come meet the one that knew everything I ever did, and yet he embraced me. If God could use that woman, who again happened to be a reject among rejects, and if he did so much through her, what might he do through you? What might he do through your life? So as we kind of wrap this up, there's really two responses I'm looking for today. Because maybe you're here and you identify with that woman. Maybe you have been afraid your whole life that God wouldn't be into you. And so you've been like preemptively rejecting him out of hand, and you've been avoiding, and you've been keeping all of those things at bay because you're afraid that you won't be enough and that he won't be into you. I want to invite you today to take the shot, to let him close enough to you to embrace you, to let you taste that water that he told this woman about, that'll quench a thirst in you that nothing else could. I want to invite you to do that. And what you'll find is that he'll embrace you the exact way he did this woman. And your life will never be the same. So that's some of us, I think, this morning who are going to embrace Jesus in that way. And the rest of us, again, we talked about this. Jason mentioned this earlier. This is a time of year when countless people are looking for a place to go worship at. And we see this every year, that we'll see as many guests come through during Christmas as we see all the rest of the year combined. And there's a recent survey where they asked people if they would go to church if they were invited. And 82% of people surveyed said that they would go to church if they were invited by a friend or a neighbor or a coworker or a family member, someone that they knew. 82% of people said that they would gladly accept that invitation. But we have this very different perception. Right? We forget that half of this whole thing is about the fact that Jesus reached this woman, but then immediately was reaching through her. You see, God's plan for you is that now that he's embraced you in this way, is that he wants to reach out and embrace so many others through your life. So I want to encourage you in the next month to do what you can to begin to figure out. Do you see people, man, what would it look like for Jesus to reach through me and touch this person too? Maybe I can invite them to something. I want to encourage you to take seriously that social media invite thing. Like, think it through. Like, what is my story? What has Jesus done in me? And it doesn't have to be your whole salvation story. It can be something that's happened in recent years that because of the church and because of God, like you've gone through it. And then share that on a social media platform and say, hey, listen, here's where my life was. Here's what God has done through this time and through this church. And so I want to encourage you to join me, because maybe God's got a plan for your life, and I want to be here with you to do it. Would you? And just invite people. Would you join me? You know. And there's like we said, there's instructions to kind of help you through it if you're nervous about doing it. But the truth is, however you do it, through social media, through in person, for whatever, God has done so much in you, but the plan doesn't stop there. In love, he wants to reconnect you to the world around you, and he wants you to be the key to them finding that thing that their heart has been thirsting for all along. Let's pray together. Father, right now, I know there's people right here in this room who have heard this and they thought, man, I didn't know this thing was so simple. I'm sinful, and Jesus, God's Son, took a punishment in my place, and if I put my faith in him, then I can experience new life in him. So right now I pray for those that are weighing that decision to put their trust in Jesus. God, as they put their trust in you, your word says that they become a new creation, that everything that's old is gone and everything becomes new because their guilt is replaced with the righteousness of your Son, Jesus. And that starts a whole new possibility for interaction between you and them, and a whole new possibility for the future. So right now I pray for those that are weighing that decision. And I pray that you would make that simple for them as they step across the line of faith in you, and they begin this journey of figuring out what it looks like to live in a relationship with Jesus. So I thank you for that. God, I thank you for those that are weighing out the question of what does it look like for me to be this woman, and to say to the world around me, come and see the man who's done so much in me. God, work through us in ways that transforms the world around us. That this Christmas, as we celebrate you coming into the world, that we'll be celebrating you coming into the lives of countless individuals we know, of our neighbors, our loved ones, family, friends. We give you thanks for that in Jesus' name. Amen. So if you made that decision today, I want to encourage you, man, maybe fill out a connection card and just kind of write on there. I won't contact you or embarrass you, but I'd love to know it. The Bible says if you believe in your heart, confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, you'll be saved. So you start this journey super easy, but I encourage you to keep joining us in church here and learn what it looks like to follow Jesus. Guys, God bless you. Have a great day.